Open up your Bibles to Luke 10:38 to 42. Luke 10:38 to 42. We come across a very well-known passage, Mary and Martha, today. And last week we come across a very well-known passage, the parable of the Good Samaritan. And Luke pits these two accounts right next to each other for a very distinct reason. Because if you think about it, the parable of the Good Samaritan, what's it really about? Loving your neighbor. It's about the importance of serving, right? The whole idea is, if you know the Lord, you serve, you love your neighbor. It's about the importance of serving. And for those of you who know the story of Mary and Martha, what's it about? It seems like it's actually saying, don't serve. Right? Serve last week. But hold up. As you serve, something you need to know. That's the idea. He pits this against each other. They're actually not contradicting messages. They're actually saying the same thing. Last week was really about, yes, we should love our neighbor, but Jesus was helping the lawyer see that he is unable to truly love his neighbor. That's the whole point. He is unable to truly love your neighbor. The importance of loving, and then shows him you actually can't do it that well, which is why you need me. Same idea this week. It's about the inability, our inability to serve. And so even as you heard the need for media, children, loving your neighbor, what happens in our hearts? Resistance. Like, whoa, what is that, right? Because it should be, yeah, I want to serve, right? That should be the nature of our hearts. I want to love people. Oh, give me every opportunity possible. So if you think about that, this is why Jesus speaks so clearly about even when you serve, you have to watch your heart, because our hearts are so inward focused that as we serve, it can actually lead us to some sort of spiritual death. And so Luke 10:38 to 42, this is God's word. Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village. And a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. Last week, love your neighbor. This week, let's put a break on that. Because if you don't know how to serve, it can actually lead to a spiritual death. What Jesus is actually showing us is not just the need, the importance of, right, to love our neighbor, to serve. Yes, these things are important. But he's always teaching us about the heart, about the nature of our hearts. And specifically, there's 2 points today. There's a spiritual death that occurs by duty. That as we serve, if it becomes this begrudging action, it leads to a spiritual deadness. But then there's a spiritual life that happens by love. And that's like the big idea of today. In this, what we see is that Martha does a lot of good things, right? Things that we should commend her for. I think if we were there, I think we would actually see Jesus commending her for the service. But for the point of the story, he points out what we need to hear. So initially, Martha invites Jesus into their home, right? Verse 38, on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed them. So Jesus doesn't just come in. Jesus enters into the village, and Martha welcomes him. This is the epitome of in the beginning of Luke 10, when the 72 are sent out, that the disciples are welcomed. It's actually showing Martha in a very good light. She is actually being the ideal host as the disciples go out to welcome, to be that person of peace. She's being that person of peace. And so she welcomes him. But not only does she welcome him, she serves. She serves like many of the women that we know in the church who have served the church in such a way that have brought life. It's showing that she is not just cooking, but doing much. There's much preparation that she is doing. And in that idea of serving much, doing a lot for the Lord, something happens and her heart turns. We've all been there, right? Initially, invite some friends over. Yeah, come on over. Yeah, I want to cook you guys a meal. Come on over. And there's much to be done, right? Because if you've cooked, you realize it's a multitasking effort, right? Because things are boiling and things are burning and things need to be cleaned. All of this has to be done at once. If you have children, children are crying. If you have a husband, if you have a wife who's not being involved, you notice that very clearly, don't you? So you slave away. Maybe you knock your pans a little bit louder, right? Passive-aggressively trying to get some attention, right? If you invite your friends over and they eat, and then they just leave without a thank you, without offering to help clean up, a part of you is kind of like, why did I do that? Right? That initial good intention of serving can quickly become duty, a begrudging act. And so what happens for Martha, she's very direct. There is no passive-aggressive here at all, right? There is no dropping of the pan, oops. There is no, oh, I'm so tired, I wish someone could help me. There's nothing like that. She's as straight as an arrow. Lord, imagine the culture, the gender differences, that gap in between. Jesus is a respected rabbi. So how bothered was she? Oh, she was bothered. If you saw her, you could see the steam coming off her head. Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Do you see that? Lord, do you not care? Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Do you see those words? And if that's not clear enough, she tells Jesus, tell her to help me, as direct as you can be. And if we did not know the rest of the story, we would think that Jesus would rebuke Mary. Wouldn't we? We all would. We all would. Because we've all been there. We've all been that person where for all of a sudden, all the responsibility falls on you. You decide to take part in this project at school. And little by little, they stop doing their work. So you just start doing everything. And they say, hey, what's up? How's it going? You just give them a cold look. Like, oh, what's up with him? Because it's that in your heart, this idea of being a part of a team or helping out in some way has quickly become something that is slowly killing her from the inside, killing us from the inside. A little tip in your prayers. If you feel like you're giving God some insight, if you need to give God some insight into your situation, chances are you are the one that's lacking some insight. Because that's what's happening here. Jesus, don't you care? What's she saying? She's saying, Jesus, don't you know? Don't you know what's going on inside your own heart? You should care about these things. You just talked about loving your neighbor. Jesus, are you that rabbi? Are you that blind? Right, Lord, don't you care? Do you see the indictment? Don't you care about me? She thinks she's giving Jesus some insight. What's the reality? She's the one that's lacking the insight, is she not? This is the point. Serving others is an essential part of loving God. So it's this equation. Right? Loving God does equal serving God and our neighbors. It is that. That's what the Good Samaritan is all about. If you are a part of the kingdom, if you have inherited the kingdom, you love your neighbor as yourself. And so the priest and the Levite are shown as two people who claim to love God, but they don't love their neighbor. That's the indictment. If you love the Lord, you serve God, you serve others. You cannot say you love the Lord and not serve others. It just does not work that way. The love of God is in you, and you overflow to serve. But it doesn't mean this. Serving God and others, serving God and our neighbors, does not necessarily mean we're loving the Lord. And we see this in Martha. Initially, I think she had a great reason to bring Jesus in. But in the midst of all the serving, in the midst of all the responsibilities, she is distracted. There's 3 signs in your life that serving will become a duty. If serving has become a duty, there's these 3 things that you should notice. A resentment towards God, a bitterness towards others, and a pity towards self. We see this here, a resentment towards God. Jesus, don't you care? It's this indictment against Jesus. Jesus, don't you care? It's a resentment towards God. A bitterness towards others. Tell her to help me. She's left me alone. Tell her to help me. And then a pity towards self, a self-pity, right? My sister has left me to serve alone, right? It's like Eeyore, right? Oh, well, what can happen? This idea of, why is this like this? When service becomes duty, in anything of life, when service becomes duty, it's a spiritual death sentence. It's just a matter of time till you start to resent the Lord. If serving is a duty, you just come here on a Sunday to do your duty. You've signed up for it. It's a spiritual death sentence. You'll grow in resentment against God, a bitterness towards people, and a self-pity party. And you think, really? Is it that extreme? Don't you think you may be overstating it? Is it really a spiritual death sentence? This is the same attitude of the prodigal son's older brother. Same exact attitude. What's the story of the prodigal son? It's this punk younger kid, right? The story is very clear. He's very selfish, very spoiled, always only thinking about himself. And it's always a younger sibling that does that in the stories, right? I'm a younger sibling myself. Take some offense to that. It's this younger child that takes half of the inheritance. Goes off to the far country. For us, it's Seoul. They're coming to Seoul, right? People are coming to Seoul to live it up. As the prodigal son leaves and departs, you could just even hear that song, the G-L-A-M. Glamorous. She's flying first class. That's the idea. It's all about him. And he spends all the money. He's with the pigs. So he wants to go back home. He goes back home. And what's the father's attitude? Bring the best robe. Bring the ring. Kill the fattened calf. My son is home. That should be the heart of us. God, whatever it is, I want to serve. I want to give. That's the heart of God for us. But what's the attitude of the older son? He hears the party. What's going on there? He doesn't want to go in. No way. That punk kid, that kid that spent half of my father's savings that could have been even mine, no way. And this is what he says specifically. Look, these many years I have served you. Can also be translated, I have slaved for you. Self-pity. I never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat. Resentment towards the Father, God, that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed a fattened calf for him, a resentment towards others. You see, it's this initial desire. Maybe you are moved by a need. You start to give to an organization, and you see that money leaving your account every month. And if resentment grows in your heart, a bitterness, or you're serving in a ministry, and there's a resentment, a bitterness, a self-pitying, right? In your mind, it's just work, 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 right? Like Rihanna, it's like work, work. That's like the idea, right? That's what you feel like you have to do. It's this idea of, I need to do this, I need to do this. You see what's happening here, and Jesus gives insight into it, and actually Luke, the author, gives even more insight to it because he uses very clear words. Because in verse 40, he says, Martha was distracted. It's a key word. Martha was distracted. How do you go from devoted to resentful? You get distracted. You've lost the purpose. You see, you can actually change up that first point and say it's not just spiritual death by duty, it's actually a spiritual death by distraction. You're being pulled in every which way. And that word distracted, literally in the Greek, has this connotation of being pulled away, of being dragged away. And this is what life is. Life's responsibilities. It's all-consuming, ever-constant, this magnetic pull on your life. And if you've lived life long enough, you sense that. You don't sense that in your teens. You kind of start to sense that in your 20s. But definitely by your 30s, by your 40s, you understand that life's demands, life's responsibilities, it's all-consuming, ever-constant, this magnetic pull upon your life. So think about it. Your work. Is it not all-consuming, ever-constant, this pull? You teach every day. You create material, and you have to create it again for the next day. There's this ever-present, all-consuming pull that you have to continue to give towards work. You may be able to finish even in 40 hours, but there's that sense of you need to do more, right? The responsibilities of work, family, your family pulls you. It's this ever-constant, all-consuming magnetic pull. Work, family, friends. Hey, when are we going to hang out? Hey, it's been a long time. Dude, what's up with you? And then there's church, to come here weekly. And then there's responsibilities of your faith, to love your neighbor. Do you see how quickly your devotion can become this resentment because you get distracted? I mean, when's the last time you ever finished your to-do list? Right? I have a to-do list that's been going on since 10 years ago, and there's things from a few years ago I still haven't done. Right? That's my to-do list. My guess is your to-do list is similar. I mean, even in the past few years, we've even created a word to figure out how to organize these responsibilities of life. That's called life hack. Right? That was not a term that I knew of growing up. But we need to figure out these life hacks because there's all these responsibilities. There's so much noise in our life and in our world. And that's what happened to Martha. She got distracted. And in verse 41, the Lord says to Martha, Martha, Martha. I don't think it was in this rebuking tone. Because you have to notice, Jesus never tells her to stop serving. And if you think the key to figure out how to do this is to stop what you're doing, that is not the key. He never tells her to stop serving. I think the way in which he spoke to her was gentle, just getting her attention. Martha, Martha. I mean, don't you realize what you're asking? You are anxious and troubled about many things. Your sister has chosen the better. Jesus is not prodding her to stop. He's prodding her to start devotion again, to start up this idea of being devoted to Him. This idea of being distracted and anxious and troubled is something that we all struggle with. And we don't think it's a big deal. Oh, I'm just a little bit stressed about this. Oh yeah, I didn't get to really meet the Lord this week because I've been so busy at work. For us, we don't think it's that big of a deal. But this is actually the point. When you're distracted and these different responsibilities of life pull at you, you become distracted in a way where your service becomes duty and spiritual death by duty or distraction. We see this throughout this Gospel of Luke. And let me just bring up a few texts. In Luke 8, the parable of the four soils. The first is the shallow soil. The devil takes away the gospel. The second is a rocky soil. There's no root. It doesn't grow deep. The third is a thorny soil. And this is what it says. And as for what fell among the thorns, they are those who hear, but as they go on their way, they are choked by what? The cares. The cares and the riches and the pleasures of life. And their fruit does not mature. You think, oh, what's the big deal? It's these distractions choke your faith and you don't mature. Right? If you garden, you're not satisfied that the plant has grown. What you want is the fruit, the vegetable. That's the goal. Apart from that, let's say you plant all these seeds, you get all these plants, but zero fruit. Would you say, oh, it's almost there? No, you'd be frustrated because it's about the fruit. That's what Jesus is getting at. It looks like you're growing, but if you're not actually bearing fruit, then your faith is choked to death. In Luke 12:22, same idea. Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, about what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. It's these very small aspects of life, the responsibilities of life. Doing your job, getting paid so you can pay for rent, food. It's these things. Luke 21:34, but watch yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and cares of this life, and that day come upon you suddenly like a trap, right? Don't be weighed down by what? The cares of this life. It's a spiritual death. It's slow. You don't see it happening. You initially join a ministry. You're eager. But then what happens? You stop being devoted. You become distracted. And that serving becomes a duty. And again, Jesus never tells Martha to stop serving, because later on I'll show you, Martha continues to serve. The goal for you is not, well. So if that's the temptation, I'm not going to serve. I'm just going to come here to church and just receive and receive and receive. No, last week was all about loving your neighbor. If you know the Lord, if you're filled with Him, you serve. And so this week it's about actually how to serve. How do you serve? What's the remedy for a death by distraction? It's a spiritual life that's founded and rooted in love. Spiritual life by love. Verse 41, the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. Never tells her to stop. Just tells her to focus on what is important. And that's what Mary is doing. And that's why Jesus will not tell Mary to go. Because this is the fundamental thing. If you're distracted, that distraction needs to turn into a devotion. It needs to be focused again on God and who He is and His love. Mary just wanted to be with Jesus. Do you see that? Verse 39. It's Mary that just sits down, sat at the Lord's feet, and listened to His teaching. This is the quintessential picture of what a disciple looks like. If you think of basketball, there's a quintessential picture of basketball, maybe Jordan shooting a free throw. Maybe if you think about figure skating, maybe it's Kim Yoon-ah, right? In discipleship, the picture is sitting at Jesus' feet. It's a picture of intimacy. It's a picture of devotion. It's a picture of worship. It's a picture of learning And that's the key. It's a picture of learning. We see this in Luke 8:35. When the demon who was possessed, this man who was possessed by a demon, is found healed and sitting at the feet of Jesus. Luke 8:35. Acts 22:3, educated at the feet of Gamaliel. This idea of this is what it means to have a disciple-student relationship. When you think about this, isn't it interesting? This idea of love and this idea of learning and how in Christianity it goes hand in hand. That you should study the Word not because you have to, but because you want to. And especially as we have a lot of teachers here, it seems to be contradicting, isn't it? Because when you teach, your students aren't excited about learning, right? It seems to be antithetical. Okay, two things that are opposite: love and learn. How does that work? It does not compute. Right? When you say, okay, this Friday we'll have an exam, your students are like, yes, I get to learn again. They're not like that. They're like, ah. Or if you say, I'm not sure if you do pop quizzes. We had pop quizzes growing up. Today, just a pop quiz today. Everyone's like, ah. No one's like, yes, learned, studying. I love this stuff. Love math. Because it seems like learning and love is antithetical. But we all know that when you love something, you learn about it, right? This is why when you come home from work and your husband is already home and he's listening to that one sports show again. You're thinking, again? He can listen to it again? And every day it's sports, same topic, different people. What? Again? Same topic, different people. What? You can listen to it again? Why? Because they love something. They want to learn more about it. It's all our hobbies. You love fashion. So all your YouTube feed is about all these fashionistas, about how to do makeup, what clothes to buy, where to go in Korea. And you may be thinking, oh, I'm so diligent. Or someone may be thinking, oh, you're so diligent. No. It's not about diligence. If you love something, you're passionate about learning. That's what Jesus is getting at. You love the Lord. Oh, you serve Him. You love the Lord. Oh, you want to learn about Him. And this is the whole idea of this. C.S. Lewis talks about it in this way. He said there's a kind of happiness and wonder that makes you serious. You want to know. There's this wonder, this joy, this satisfaction. It makes you serious, a serious student. You do the hard things. Martin Lloyd-Jones talks about it in this way. People have this foolish notion that you cannot be happy and serious at the same time. That is where the trouble comes in. But you can. The only joy worth having is a serious joy, a sober joy, a deep joy, a solid joy. And that's Mary. No frills. Jesus comes, she sits. Because she's serious. She's serious about her joy. She's serious about Jesus. She is devoted. It's not about discipline. There's an aspect to that in our faith. It's about devotion. It's about love. It's about turning your distraction back into a devotion, to be able to see Him for who He is. I'm going to close helping you see this in a few other passages, because this is not the only time that Mary and Martha is spoken of. It's later on. They've taken Jesus' word to heart. This is the one thing necessary. Martha, this is the one thing necessary. It's what Mary is doing. So Mary continues it. I believe Martha learned it. So in John 11, Mary and Martha's brother, Lazarus, has passed away. It's been 4 days. They were waiting for Jesus. They wanted Jesus to come. They sent for Him. But Jesus did not come. So Martha is angry. Where were you, Jesus? If you were here, my brother would not have died. And this is the famous passage when Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet he shall live. Yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. And then Jesus says this to her. Do you believe this? Have you heard? Are you still learning? Are you a disciple? And this is what she says. Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. This is one of the most clear statements, professions of faith in the Gospels. It parallels Peter's confession when he says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And in response to Peter, Jesus says this about his confession, I tell you, you are Peter, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Do you see the power of devotion? You learn from him. That learning turns into love. That love turns into a devotion. And it's a cycle that happens. You sit at his feet. You learn about him. You're in awe. It moves your heart, leads you to love, leads you to devotion. It's that kind of faith that leads to this kind of profession, this kind of devotion. We see this most clearly in Mary. John 12, it's a story that we all know of. Let me just read it for us. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany where Lazarus was, and whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So now some time has passed. Lazarus has been resurrected. And remember, Mary has sat at Jesus' feet, and so she's learned. What did Jesus talk about? I'm sure she talked about what he's going to be doing, who he is. I'm sure he's talked about the cross, because this is after Luke 9, when Jesus sets his face towards Jerusalem. So Mary has soaked all this in. Verse 2, so they gave a dinner for him there. Martha served. Do you see that? She didn't stop serving. But she's now serving joyfully. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at his feet, the picture of a disciple. You sit at his feet, you recline at the table, you learn from him. And then it's these words, verse 3, Mary therefore took a pound of expensive ointment and made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. And Judas says this, but Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, he who was about to betray him, said, why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? And then later on, Jesus says in verse 8, the poor you will always have with you, but you do not always have me. Commentators don't know if Mary knew what was going to happen to Jesus. I don't know. But as I studied this past week, I think Mary knew. I think Mary knew where Jesus was headed. This is why she offers up this perfume of 300 denarii. That's about 300 days' wage. Almost a year. If you make 40 grand, it's about 30-some grand. It's that much money. And so if you're Judas, you're thinking, what are you doing? You know how much people we can feed? And that's true. And again, you would think Jesus would say something along the lines of, Mary, you should steward better. No. What does he say? The poor you will always have, but you will not always have me. Mary, I think, knew where Jesus was headed. And she knew what Jesus would do. He would go upon that cross to die the death that she should have died. And so for her, 30-some grand, nothing. Imagine that. 30-some grand, 3/4 of your salary. gone in an instant. And for all of us, I know we'd be thinking, oh my gosh, that's a lot of money. 3/4 of my salary. But for Mary, it was a no-brainer because she was devoted. She knew Jesus. She knew what he was going to do. And that's the gospel. Once you see that, don't you see? The question really gets flipped. It's not, oh, which ways should I serve? Oh, how should I help people? Well, should I give 10%, maybe 11%? No. That if Jesus is only that big to you, your service becomes duty very quickly. But if he is God who has become man, who has paid your penalty, you can give 3/4 of your salary and say, this is for you, Jesus. Because nothing can compare to the love of God. You see, that's how you have life, that's how you serve. Spiritual life comes by not you loving. Spiritual life comes by when you understand his love for you. And that's the encouragement, church. That your service would always be anchored in his love for you. When you know his love, you will serve. If you're bitter, if you have resentment, if you're throwing self-pity parties, the goal is not for you to take a break. That might be. But the goal really is get devoted again. You've been distracted for too long. Sit at his feet. Receive from him. Let's pray.